welcome. Episode 2, Stakeholders Podcast, brought to you by National Beef Association and also Boehringer Ingelheim. So once again, I'm joined with James Herrick, Ben Harmon and Sioned Timothy, and we're going to start this week with an update on current bluetongue situation. So since July 2025, 212 cases reported across GB. So we've got 198 cases of bluetongue in England, and that breaks down into 190 cases of bluetongue 3, one case only of bluetongue 8, and 7 cases with both bluetongue 3 and bluetongue 8. And just for clarity, those 7 cases with both strains of bluetongue are not 2 strains in one bovine or ovine. They are on the same holding. In Wales, there have been 14 cases of bluetongue 3 only, and to date, although I'm aware they've started some winter surveillance in Scotland, there have been no cases of bluetongue 3 or 8 found in Scotland. So, Sioned, I believe you were in Ingelheim last week at a big bluetongue conference. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I was lucky to spend a couple of days in Germany last week at a conference organised by the division of Boehringer Ingelheim that deal with transboundary diseases. So they work with bluetongue and FMD all over the world. They're kind of real experts in that field. So they brought together a group of researchers and policymakers and government representatives and other vets and veterinary stakeholders from across Europe to hold the second Bluetongue Symposium to share experiences and discuss the topic of bluetongue in depth, really. It was a really successful event, good representatives from the UK and a lot of information sharing. And I think some of the big themes that came out of it were that we're still in a time of real uncertainty, particularly here in the UK, in terms of what might happen next year, but also because of, as everybody's observed, this hugely different ability of BTV3 to cause disease and economic impact in different countries. And I think as well, the other strong theme was that we're not just talking about BTV3, that we're probably going to see the emergence of other BTV serotypes and BTV8, as you mentioned, Neil, for example, in the coming years, and that there's kind of an ongoing need for vigilance, really. I think the main sort of takeaway was that vaccination is still the only really good tool that we've got to control the virus, and that the countries that are now no longer seeing problems are typically the ones that have achieved a really high vaccination rate this year or last year.
So have they basically used vaccination to create herd immunity?
Yeah, exactly. You know, that's the objective of that large scale vaccination ultimately, is to do exactly that, and it seems to have been successful.
And is there any country that you came across while in Germany? Is there anyone in the same boat, excuse the pun, as we are?
I don't think there is, Neil. Actually, that was one of the takeaways from it for me. I think we've tried to map the progression of the outbreak in the UK to other countries who are maybe a little bit ahead of us and use that as a way of perhaps predicting what might happen here. But actually, I think that was one of the things I took from it, is that it has been really diverse and probably not in year 3 of the outbreak next kind of this coming season necessarily, which brings a lot of questions about what might happen. We don't know how immune the national flock herd is in the UK, whether the virus has spread beyond where we've seen animals test positive for it. We haven't really seen the virus get into livestock dense parts of the country yet. And I suppose, given that, it's difficult to understand, what the picture will be in the coming season.
No, I was wondering, can you help me understand in broad strokes what the situation is across Europe in terms of their outbreaks at the moment?
Yeah, so the majority of countries have had a much improved season this year. So, for example, in the Netherlands, which is, I think, the case we're probably most aware of because of the extreme kind of clinical disease they saw in the first year. In the Netherlands, they've had barely any, if any. I think they may not have had any documented cases this past vector season. So that will partly be due to the fact that they've had a fairly widespread outbreak and animals have become naturally immune. But it does really seem to have been the vaccine that kind of turned the corner for them, and that kind of wholesale uptake of vaccination amongst farmers.
With the vaccine, what's the key difference between the countries that have had high take-up as opposed to the ones that have had lower take-up? Is it farmer-driven or is it government-driven, like policy? What is it?
In some places, there has been subsidised vaccination, which is obviously, helps with things. So in Belgium, for example, there was fully funded vaccination. What they have said, though, is that they don't think there will be next year. So that was really a kind of emergency measure to that took place in sort of both politically and disease kind of uncertain times to bring things under control. And so obviously that got large scale uptake. I think, where it's probably a balance, James, of whether the vaccine's been funded and how acute the kind of perceived disease situation has been, really. But we did talk quite a lot as well about kind of communication around vaccination, because the best outcome of vaccination is obviously that you see nothing, which doesn't always make you feel like you've invested well, kind of thing. I think the kind of communication that sits around that and really getting that message out there that it is an investment is something that still needs some work, really. And one interesting thing that was mentioned is that the HDE working as of a bit of a European consortium with I think a French research group and with Boehringer as well, to come up with a improved version of the cost calculator that they produced, which will actually capture more of the evidence-based data on BTV losses and the kind of variation in that we've seen around Europe as well, and then calculate based on those two scenarios the cost of vaccinating, including all of the on costs like handling and so forth, versus all of the kind of potential detailed costs of having an outbreak of BTV on your farm. So hopefully that will go some way, or that will help in those discussions. But I think, again, there's the sort of human aspect of it, isn't it, of how it is actually proposed kind of on a one-to-one basis by everybody involved in that decision.
So this is probably more at Neil, I guess, probably, but we know of several groups of cattle that are wanting to be exported back into Europe for breeding purposes. And obviously that isn't going to happen at the moment. And now that they appear to be slightly ahead of us in certain places in terms of their disease levels, it's even less likely to happen. So what we've got to do then is achieve that national herd status, isn't it? Herd immunity, get ourselves clear in order that we can then once again start taking cattle or getting those sales that people have worked hard to achieve. Yeah. So it's not a quick fix.
Yeah, no. And I think so. Obviously, there's been chat about an SPS agreement with the EU, which will then probably take down some of the barriers that Brexit created. But what it won't take down yet is the disease barrier. And I know there's been a little bit of chat. And Sioned, this may have came up last week. In the continent, they're talking about downgrading bluetongue and it not becoming a reportable disease. Was there much chat about that?
Yeah, there was chat about the implications of that. So they're talking about moving it, changing its classification as a notifiable disease, so that it will remain notifiable, but there will be fewer restrictions associated with the presence of disease, which could, probably in the slightly longer term, allow transport of animals, of healthy animals. So you'd still need pre and post movement testing, but of healthy animals from countries that have the virus confirmed. As I understand it, I think there's pros and cons to that. And I think, it's a lot of these exotic disease with a lot of these exotic diseases, it's always that question, isn't it? About what point do you accept that they may be endemic, because obviously that's not the ideal situation for necessarily anyway. But I suppose in addition to that, it will be interesting. We're coming to a point where the vaccines that have provisional marketing authorizations should start gaining full marketing authorizations off the back of producing duration of immunity data. And that may free up trade to a level as well. Currently, because there's no duration of immunity, vaccination can't be used as a basis for international trade.
When's that data going to come, Sioned?
Soon, hopefully. So it's something we've been working on in terms of Boltavo, the Boehringer vaccine. It's something we've been working on from very early in the whole registration process. Obviously, to demonstrate duration of immunity, you need for animals to have been vaccinated for that duration. So these are the studies that always take a little bit longer. So the objective is to test the immunity in animals that have been vaccinated for, say, 6 months, and then test a group that have been vaccinated for a year to check that the vaccine's still working. And then if that data is satisfactory, you submit it to the authorities, and hopefully that duration of immunity gets added to the data sheet. So that process is underway at the moment, and we're hoping that we'll be able to have that added in the coming months.
So are we waiting for the likes of VMD to go through the process of accepting that data, or is the data still being collated?
We're at the end of collating it effectively. So we're at the point of submission of that data.
Well, I think from moving from emergency authorization to second stage, I think they did that very quickly. So, we might go to full authorization maybe by February, March.
Yeah, it's hard to say. But I think, as you say, one of the really positive aspects of the whole bluetongue experience for me has been how well all of the different stakeholder groups can collaborate together when there really is a pressing reason to, really. So yeah, I mean, I think everybody's working away to try and get this done as soon as possible.
Yeah, and maybe for the benefit of listeners, Sioned, we should try and explain this in more detail. So emergency authorization for bluetongue vaccine was very similar to COVID vaccines. Yeah, we had a vaccine and everyone decided it was safe to use it. And then a provisional marketing authorization means there's a little bit of data, but not, and there's enough data to confirm it's obviously continues safe, and it gives a bit of perhaps viremia protection. But a full marketing authorization means it's fully tested, fully authorized, safe to use, built-in braces.
It really is a case of very similar to COVID, of shortening the process as far as possible. You still have as rigorous an assessment of safety and efficacy, but the timelines between each of those stages are shortened. All of the steps are expedited. And some of the work, I think, that would probably take place sequentially as part of that process takes place kind of in parallel, so that you're not waiting to finish one step before you progress to the next step. But the remaining piece with the provisional marketing authorization, the regulators, the VMD, actually say what bits of data are missing and are needed to make it a full marketing authorization. And the key one with this is the duration of immunity data.
And of course, with bluetongue, we had previous recent, let's say, history and knowledge of vaccine production. With COVID, we didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the technologies are very different. But yeah, the sort of recognition of the need for speed is common, I think, to both situations.
We need to learn to not talk about COVID anymore, but apparently it's the reason why the country's finances are still in a mess in some people's eyes. So that will lead us nicely into the later part of this podcast this week when we'll be speaking about the budget.
I'm curious about the two strains, and obviously they kind of appeared on the wrong side of the country a little bit here. So I'm curious about if there's any idea about how that might happen, how the jump in the middle might have been achieved, and also what's happening again in the rest of Europe regarding the two strains.
Yes, my understanding is that has likely come across the channel probably from the northwest of France, which is apparently a route that's recognised in the kind of air plume forecasting that DEFRA do, which is interesting because I think we have got that mindset that these things come in on the east of the country, but clearly there is a risk along the south coast, really.
And how's the rest of Europe doing with regarding to having to deal with two strains?
Vaccination. Yeah, there's the question we get increasingly is about multi-strain vaccines, because I think a lot of Europe is preparing for bluetongue outbreaks when they happen to be to be multi-serotype outbreaks, really.
Is that something you can do then? You can put multi-strain vaccines together in one jab and hit them for both?
Yeah, you can. So as you know, each serotype induces quite specific immunity, so you don't get a lot of cross protection. Like if you're vaccinated against BTV3, you'll still be susceptible to BTVA. But there are actually registered vaccine platforms which registered in the UK with full marketing authorizations that allow multiple strains to be incorporated. There isn't one currently with BTV3 though.
So it's now time for us to hit the first of our podcast segments, Rare Cuts. And this week, our rare cut comes from me. I think a lot of people, I try to be a pretty open book. I think a lot of people would be pretty surprised to find out that I could probably out ballroom dance any farmer in the UK. Probably most people in the UK, actually. I've ballroom danced for about 18 years, something like that. And the only time I actually stopped ballroom dancing like twice a week was when my first child was born and I couldn't pull it in anymore. So yeah, I love it. I absolutely love it. Ballroom dancing. I'm a big fan of the foxtrot's my favorite dance, but also like doing, a lot of the Latin dances as well. So,
sorry, Jess, can you clarify what you meant when you can't pull it in anymore? Just so listeners can get their heads around that.
Well, there's a lot that goes on, isn't there?
Is that a dancing term? Is that something? Is that a dance floor term or something?
Maybe. Yeah. Don't tell my wife. I love it. It's great. I used to be a massive Strictly fan. I don't get to watch that much anymore either. But it's I sort of just always took to it and always enjoyed it. So yeah.
My girlfriend would be so jealous. So I've got 2 left feet and they both belong to elephants. I just step on hers. Wow. I didn't know that. Yeah. Good info, James.
Before we hit our main guest, it's time for us to do our second segment piece, Minute Steak. And this time, our Minute Steak comes from Bowringer's own Sioned Timothy.
Everybody should weigh their carbs more and weigh their carbs early in life as well, because I think what we're realizing more and more is that in all systems, particularly with breeding stock, having early life growth and performance data is a real indicator of long-term success as well. Longevity, production, quality. And, a lot of talk around epigenetics and things like that. And it's really early in life that you see how well set up that cow is for her productive life. So it's a kerfuffle, but the more data we can gather on these animals early on, the better. And I think there's a huge opportunity with beef, because on the dairy side, we talk a lot about these early life kind of success factors. On the beef side, we know a lot less. And so if we start collecting some of this data around early life events and early life performance, it could really influence how we do things.
Can you quantify more, Sioned?
Yeah, well, in terms of what interventions, Ben?
No, in terms of, you said we should weigh them more. So more than we do, you're saying. But what's your ideal scenario?
Yeah, I think weaning weights is critical. I think if you can get 1 or 2 earlier weights in, then that will tell you so much more, and that will tell you when your system's performing well and when there might be things that could be improved. I think, having a good assessment of early life management is really critical. So if you can go in at 6-8 weeks and weigh carbs, then it will tell you a lot about that. And looking at variability as well, reducing variability, streamlining processes, getting that consistency is a real important thing. And unless you're measuring stuff, you don't know whether that's happening or not.
Yeah, so 2 or 3 weights up to weaning, so a birth weight and 2 or 3 weights up to weaning, you think that would give us some pretty good information?
I think it could be industry changing, yeah.
Neil Wilson, you actually do weigh your carbs, don't you?
Yeah, and I think I do, as well as having suckler cows, I have been doing a bit of dairy beef back and forward. And all I say, Sioned, is that I think you've just got to be careful how often you do it, because the stress of putting them through a handling system.
Yeah.
I think the research shows that you can lose a week of performance. You've got I suppose the caveat to all of that is, I totally agree, but don't be running them through every week going, oh, I wonder what weight they are this week. I'm not saying that people would do that, but I would, I'm totally behind you, but I think there's a fine balance to that, I think, to make sure that you're not stressing them out on a regular basis for running them through handling systems and stuff, isn't it?
Totally. I think, like a lot of these things, it's about streamlining processes, isn't it? And finding when you do have opportunities to do it, if you've got cattle in for other reasons, capitalising on the opportunity to collect whatever information you can. Ultimately, we're looking at trends, aren't we? So it doesn't need to be done at a particular time, but if you get the chance, go for it.
Is there any data on how many people would weigh calves and then weigh at weaning? Does anyone have any idea how many farmers would actually do it? I mean, we weigh all our calves and then we weigh everything at weaning, and then actually just manage cows. We cull cows based on that, how their cows are performing, and then, weaning weight ratios. But again, that's another thing that in my beef group not many people are doing, but I'd love to know how many people would actually do it, because I think it's valuable data. I think you could, if you're going to keep a cow, you might as well be keeping a good cow.
Listeners, viewers, welcome to NBA Stakeholders podcast number 2. Here we are in the depths of Westminster, in Victoria Atkins' office, and we appreciate the opportunity to interview you today, 27th of November, the day after the budget, and we'll obviously come to the budget later. So, a bit of an introduction from me. I've already introduced Victoria. Ben Harmon, NBA Chairman and farmer at the end of the Metropolitan line. James Herrick, family farmer from Leicestershire, obviously a beef farmer and an NBA board member, and last year's Farmers Guardian Beef Farmer of the Year. I always say that because he didn't win it this year. So here we are, in the hub of British government. We're obviously going to have a chat to Victoria about the budget and all things budget. But firstly, what brought you to politics?
Oh, well, I grew up in a family with politics very much at its core, so I was very used to politics being talked about around the dining table. But I was determined when I went to university, I was not going to get involved in politics. And so I read law at Cambridge and was really excited about becoming a criminal barrister. And I ended up prosecuting the sorts of cases that you read about in the newspapers, focusing on organised crime. Usually, we weren't able to get the gangs on the drugs and the guns and the people trafficking directly. So rather like Al Capone, we got them on the money and prosecuting them for fraud.
So I think I read something there that you made a major drugs kingpin break down and cry in the witness box and change his plea. Well done. And this could be repeated across the corridor there.
And we won't make any comments that you studied crime and now you're in this building either, so we'll just probably leave that there. But you come obviously, as you say, from a political background. Your father was an MP and an MEP, so obviously your father was not a toolmaker. So,
and my mum, I'm always very keen. My mum is, and still is, a very, very active local councillor in Lancashire, and I'm very proud of her as well.
And I think local government is the hub of everything we do, and creates, opportunities for everyone. So here we are, the day after the budget, inheritance tax, no change. Yeah. What's your view?
It's a budget of broken promises. Everybody listening to this podcast will see their taxes go up. They will see inflation continue to rise. Public debt will continue to rise, and that matters to us all because it means our taxes are being spent on interest payments rather than on the public services we care about. And we will see unemployment rise. And of course, we know in the agricultural sector we have been seeing that since the last budget as well. And sadly, all of this is happening in order to pay for the increasing benefits bill that Rachel Reeves has decided is her primary purpose in government. So yesterday's bill has been described across the media, yesterday's budget, has been described across the media in various ways, but I think the way Kevy summed it up yesterday, that this is a budget for Benefit Street, sums it up really well.
And obviously, prior your current position, Shadow DEFRA Minister, you were Health Secretary, but you've also been a Treasury Minister, so you know how the Treasury works, or does it not work?
No, well, very much. I was Financial Secretary to the Treasury with Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor, and so I prepared 3 fiscal events, and so I've seen how the Treasury works. I've seen the process that civil servants will go through with ministers to find what we call revenue raisers, and the way in which this budget was prepared over the last 6 months is utterly unprecedented and shambolic. Nobody has ever seen a Chancellor float policy ideas into the air to see what reaction they get, and then they're sort of ran in to quite the extent that she has. And if you remember, as Kemi set out so eloquently and, dare I say it, funnily yesterday in her speech, we had that extraordinary speech over breakfast TV where she interrupted our breakfasts and basically setting out the ground for income tax rises, so a U-turn on their manifesto. And then a couple of days later, they announced that it was leaked that they weren't going to raise it.
So, was that a dead cat bounce thing? Did she come out and do that in order to prepare everyone for the worst? So when the dead cat bounced back up, it doesn't seem quite as bad now? Was that the thinking behind it? Because it does seem pretty bad.
Yeah, and well, who knows? Again, if that was their motivation, what on earth do they think the public are doing? Do they take us for fools? Because I think had they done that, had it succeeded, had the news not been leaked to the FT, I don't think the public would have bought it for a moment. No.
I've seen some images of Larry the cat, and I don't think it's dead yet. just to clarify that. So, what would you have done? If you were still in the Treasury, what would you have done?
Well, first and foremost, we would never have removed the APR and BPR tax relief from IHT. You know that because not only was it a Conservative government that introduced the 100% relief all those 20, 30, 40 years ago, we have maintained it. Every single Conservative Chancellor has maintained it since. We also would not have taken the decisions that she made on national insurance and the other taxes that have hurt businesses so badly across the economy. And so we would have been in a very different position today than we would have been, than Labour finds itself in. And it is those taxes, that budget last year, a budget, by the way, that it was the largest tax-raising budget in decades. For her to then say at the time, that's it, we're one and done, I think was the phrase she used. We're not coming back for more tax raises. Well, my goodness me, a year later she has broken that. That
was naive, wasn't it? Really naive. So Treasury, I'm led to understand that Treasury view farmers as unproductive subsidy junkies was a phrase that was trotted out at some point, and that there are mandarins in Treasury who have been trying to pull this trick off for years but have never found someone quite naive enough to buy the line. Care to comment? And the next Treasury person?
So officials will always they have a document they prepare on potential revenue raisers, and it has everything in it, costs and benefits, and that's their job, in fairness. This is what you could do, but the political decision is for ministers and the Chancellor to take. And look, I think we can all understand the concerns about that very, very small group of people who invest in land, they don't farm it, they are literally using it as a cash deposit scheme or box, and that's not in what we understand farming to be, and it's not what certainly you and your members understand by the word farming. And so, we can always look at that, just as with winter fuel payments. We all understand that if a multi-millionaire is receiving their winter fuel payment, why is that allowed to happen? The trick is, though, that ministers need to look at that and say, well, the political judgment is on winter fuel payments, for example. The reason that we have universal winter fuel payments is because for those people who are at the threshold of pension tax credits, including, dare I say it, many of my own constituents because of the demographics of my constituency. If someone is receiving, I don't know, £13,000 or £14,000 in pensions, that winter fuel payment, particularly in rural areas where we may not be on the grid, we may have to fill up our tank to heat our home that winter. That £300 makes a genuinely important difference. It will mean people making decisions between heating and eating. And so that was why it's one of those, if you like, the costs of living with a policy that we believe overall works for the majority of people that we're trying to focus on. And so all of these policies have, every single policy any minister will undertake will have trade-offs, but it's for the minister to make the decision, not for officials. They just advise.
So, decision having been made, right now, there are people whose parent might be suffering from dementia, I know in one case, and they don't have an LPA. And there are folks who are on end-of-life care who are desperately worried and want to die in many cases before this cliff edge next year, because the damage that will be done to their children unintentionally is so massive. This is a tax on tragedy. Yeah. What can we do? Is the game up? Do we have to just suck this up? Or is there still something that we can do as lobbyists, as MPs, to try and get this worked out? So
the human toll of this is, it is quite overwhelming, actually. And I've tried.
And that's why you would think some of this would fit into traditional labour values?
Exactly. And the people, that when I hear, and people are kind enough to share their stories with me pretty much everywhere I go, and people send me their emails, and please continue to do so, because I hope you've seen from DEFRA Orals a couple of weeks ago, I do try and bring these cases to light. But the human cost of this policy is just overwhelming, as I say. What I'm trying to do is to get ministers to, first of all, acknowledge these tragedies, or the decisions that people are making. I mean, I've had people contact me about loved ones who have been diagnosed with cancer and who are now refusing treatment. And I tried, a couple of weeks ago, to bring forward some of the stories that the agricultural chaplain of Suffolk had shared with me, who, by the way, had tried to meet, he'd asked to meet DEFRA ministers, and they refused. I'm trying to get this through to ministers, but they refuse to acknowledge it. And when I do ask them questions about these cases, these people, these families, I'm accused of politicising it, which is just shameful, because this is real life.
I think there was a famous video of you challenging Steve Reed over this, because someone had, I think, had implicitly stated in a suicide note that they'd taken their life over the proposed inheritance tax, and he turned it back on you and made. So how does that make you feel, that you're trying to bring this to light, a genuine concern that you're aware of, but then it just gets completely shunned off by them, as if it's just not important? That must, taking the politics out of it, that must make you feel pretty awful as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind admitting there have been times when I've had meetings with families where I have been, brought to tears by the stories they have shared with me, because they are just so upsetting and tragic. And this is against the backdrop of us all understanding that farmers, by definition, the weather, the harvest, the problems with biosecurity, problems with disease, and so all of these things that you have to deal with in the day-to-day life of running a farm of whatever type. The fact that these stories are happening, I find them very, very moving. And for farmers, to share their stories, being usually so resilient, it is really, really humbling. And on a human level, I have tried. I genuinely have tried with these ministers, both in the chamber but outside the chamber as well. And it is as if they're automatons. They're robots. That this is the tax policy. And I keep coming back. Ultimately, this is just a tax policy for them. Yeah. When you look at the budget yesterday, they made their big announcement about digital ID. Whatever you think about digital ID, apparently it's going to cost us £1.8 billion. Well, are we really saying that farmers' lives are going to be paying for that policy, that single policy? It's about choices.
Ideology springs to mind rather than anything else. If it was, and as a member organisation, we are aware of the obligation to try and contribute to public services. Our members, rural communities need doctors, healthcare, NHS, etc. So there may be alternatives.
And you pay your taxes.
And
by
we
the
pay
way.
our tax. Yeah.
It's this,
But
this narrative from this government that somehow suggests that farmers don't pay taxes. Of course you do.
Yeah, often quite extensive taxes, because people don't necessarily draw an enormous amount of money out because they're quite happy. Like, they love what they do. They're quite happy just bumbling along, paying for their food every week, putting like the heat and fuel in the tank, as you mentioned earlier, and then when it comes to the end of year accounts, all of a sudden you've made a load of money because you didn't draw a wage.
Yeah.
And then you pay big taxes, arguably more taxes than what you would have done if you'd have just drawn a wage and took some, some of the tax allowances that way.
And when I, just coming back to your question, when I worked, I was lucky enough to be appointed by Theresa May within a year and a half or 2 years of the first being elected. And I was put into the Home Office. And one of the pieces of work within politics that I'm most proud of was being able to bring forward the Domestic Abuse Act, which we know is helping 2.3 million adult victims of domestic abuse, as well as their children. And something like that you can look back on and think, that I did good with that. We, the government, did good. I don't know how ministers look themselves in the mirror with this policy, because none of them can claim that they are doing good with this policy. It is a tax on tragedy.
Comes back to ideology again. Do they want to free land up for other uses? Is that the driver? If it was about simply raising money, we can think of so many different ways that we could do that, and they won't listen.
Well, this was one of the rather insulting things, sorry to jump in on you there, Neil, that she said again yesterday and has said before, well, no one's giving me a credible alternative. Well, they won't if you don't open your eyes and your ears.
Yeah, there's many alternatives.
There are many alternatives and many people who want to contribute towards that. She just has no interest in listening.
And the Chancellor doubled down on IHT changes yesterday. There's no other way of dressing it up. The tweak that she announced about spousal allowances being transferable, that was a technical amendment that, frankly, should have been included in the draft bill in the first place. We certainly would have put it forward as a technical amendment. So all she has done is equalise the treatment of these assets along with other, in line with other assets. There is nothing about this that means that they've done anything other than double down.
And talking on assets, we are livestock based, obviously, National Beef Association. Depending on the age and scale and weight of animals at the moment, 400 animals could be £1 million.
Yeah.
And I think the reality is that people think farmers are rich, and some of those big finishers are working on a margin of maybe 12, 14, 16 pounds per head. Now you multiply that by 400 or 500 annually, it's not a big income. And without agricultural support, which we'll come to in a minute perhaps, they don't make any money.
It's driven by economies of scale, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that automatically then just makes them completely susceptible to this tax, because they have to have the volume. There's no other way around it.
And I'm very conscious as well, this has dominated our political conversations over the last 12 months because it is just such a devastating tax. But there is so much else that we should be looking at within agriculture, and providing that hope and ambition and excitement about the future. Because I think if we didn't have this hanging over us all, I say us, sorry, I feel so strongly about it, but if it wasn't hanging over everybody, business investment would be far, far higher than it is at the moment. I know for a fact farmers have taken the completely rational economic decision to just stop investing, because as one rather famous social media farmer put it to me, what's the point? She might as well have the shirt off my back. If we're serious about, as we are as Conservatives, we're serious about ensuring that agriculture moves with the times but provides a bright, exciting opportunity, particularly for younger farmers, we should be talking about the other stuff. I was at a conference this week, actually, the day before budget, about nature finance. And the ideas running around in that room, they have 400 investors there from all over the world. And the ideas running around in that room about how we invest in peatlands, in forestry, which will then have a very positive knock-on effect for flood mitigation and so on. All of these ideas are there. And yet everybody has been frozen in aspic, if you like, because of this tax.
It sucked every bit of oxygen out of the whole industry. And as an industry, we sometimes banter and challenge different sectors, but what this policy has done is pulled the whole industry together as one. Yeah.
And what I'm trying to do as well with all the media I do and everything I'm talking about, trying to get the message across. This matters to the whole of society, because guess what? We all eat food, and as food prices are rising, record numbers of farms are closing, and we know, sadly, that there will be more this year. Business investment is down. Productivity, by definition, will be lower as well than it could be. All of this means that food prices will only continue to rise, which, in fact, the OBR confirmed yesterday as its prediction.
And imports of food, because we produce less food. We're not investing in our businesses the way we would like to, because we're terrified about the future. And all the time, our food security as a nation, at a time of serious uncertainty, with war on our doorstep, not too far away in Ukraine, at times of such uncertainty, we are producing less and less of the food that we eat.
It's funny you should say that, actually. In the Labour manifesto, it's stated clearly in there that food security is national security, and that they would champion British farming to work alongside working with nature. And it looks like every single thing they've done has completely gone against the promises that they make in the manifesto. And it brings me back to what we said in the last podcast, that if you're going to make a promise in a manifesto, you should stick to it. You should have the gumption to actually say, we made this promise, we're going to stick to it, and we'll make other things work.
Completely agree. And this is why I declared at Conservative Party conference that we are in a food and farming emergency, because of all the pressures we've just talked about, and the fact, particularly for members of the public that perhaps don't live in the countryside or don't have any connections with farming, nonetheless, their supermarket bills are going higher and higher. And we know that is partly, not completely, but partly due to Labour's measures in the last budget, let alone the one yesterday. We know that because the Bank of England governor has said that. Yeah. And so I've written to Emma Reynolds. We held a summit, an emergency summit, inviting farmers from all over the country to give us ideas about the 5 things you need to keep your heads above water over the next 12 months. And I then put those 5 items into a letter to Emma Reynolds. I've sent it about a week ago, still waiting to hear back. We will keep chasing. But things like, from a livestock perspective, the fact that the weather has been so bad this year and such a bad harvest, I know there are many livestock farmers who are saying, well, crikey, I don't know how we're going to feed our animals through winter.
It stacks up though as well, doesn't it? Because it's not just, it's the pulling of the SFI. We've got increasing wages, increasing national insurance. We've got the closing of capital grants, and then
BPS being whipped
away. Speeding up of basic payment decline.
Twice they've taken that away.
Exactly. The max you can get now is
600 quid.
680 quid.
I said to my
it's crazy.
In Lincolnshire.
And then bang on inheritance tax on top of that, and potentially some farms will, as we mentioned earlier, when we were chatting outside, some farms will fall into this new mansion tax because their farmhouse, which most farms don't care about their farmhouse, they just care about their farm, will be worth an extortionate amount of money, especially in places like where you farm, Ben. So it's just one thing after another, and then wonder why there's no investment in farming, why people have just got their heads in the sand.
Leaky roof, can't afford to heat the place, but it's worth a lot of money. So what do? Your family, your parents live there, your grandparents live there, your great-grandparents live there, so what do? We sell up and try again somewhere else? It's not like a pity thing, is it? Because we're very fortunate to have assets, but we have assets and we have no cash.
But those assets, the value of those assets are driven not because of the economic value created through agriculture. They're driven through the value that's perceived because of their finiteness.
And some of that's a postcode lottery as well.
Some of that's actually driven by city money.
Well,
when people want to come and live in the countryside.
I'm Leicestershire. I'm in middle of the country. 54 minutes it took me to get here on a train. Well, if I was commuting to London, I can live in Leicestershire. Well, what does that do? It can drive up the house prices.
I came from the end of the Metropolitan line. It took me longer.
Exactly. Round by me, we've got Market Harbour extortionate house prices, and because you can just hop on a train direct into London, and it just spreads that. We're in a small country. There's not many other countries, especially in Europe, that have that. That sort of population dynamic where you can get to other places very quickly.
And most of them have got better rail services than what we have.
Oh, let's not go off the rail service.
And by the way, on the subject of rail fares, because they were very proud of the fact they've frozen rail fares, and for anyone commuting, I get it, but there is no such thing as government money. There's no free money. The subsidies they will be paying to the rail companies in order to freeze those fares are coming out of our taxes. So we pay for it one way or another. It may not just not be at the ticket machine when you're trying to dash onto the train at Leicester Station or whatever.
So, moving on, we didn't get anything yesterday or anything significant. You're an ex-Treasury Minister. The Finance Bill is next. That's the next place to challenge. Can you explain to our members how that can work or how it would work? So
we as Conservatives and the official opposition, we will put an amendment down to repeal that part of the Finance Bill. We will also have a think about sort of other amendments as well. But what I want to do, if I can, and I'm subject, conscious this is subject, to the decision of the Chairman of Ways and Means who decides what amendments are voted on, but we want Labour MPs to really, have to make a choice as to whether or not they support this death tax or not, particularly for the 114 rural MPs who have agriculture in their constituency, and be very, very clear. If they vote in support of the tax, if they vote with the government on this, then they are putting their jobs before yours. There is no other way of describing this. When Emma Reynolds votes for this tax, she is putting her job as a cabinet minister with her red box and her ministerial car, she's putting that above the interests of her constituents who farm.
And lives. Above other people's lives.
And so when does this unravel? When does the Finance Bill get presented?
I don't think we've got a precise date. It will be before Christmas, so it's going to be very, very fast moving. There will be an awful lot else in the Finance Bill as well, of course, because it's, I should say, the Finance Bill, explain the...
No, clarity is good.
Parliamentary procedure. The Finance Bill is the bill that enables in law all of the things that Rachel Reeves talked about yesterday in the budget, and a lot more that's in the Red Book, the document that sort of sets out all of the detail of the budget. The Finance Bill is the piece of legislation that puts that into law. And so whilst the IHT changes were announced last budget, and will not come into force until April 2026, it is this Finance Bill that is putting that into law. So that's why this is such a critical moment.
Neil and I were here a couple of weeks ago talking to some rural Labour MPs who are minded to vote for the right amendment, which is great news, and there were good people who have genuinely cared about their constituents, and credit to them for that. But my understanding is we were at a number around about 35 that would be minded to vote for the right amendment, and I think we were going to need 75, 80 to actually come across. What can we will carry on talking to people, that's what we do, and you will carry on people talk, but what can we as a whole do to try and encourage some of those rural MPs, or not even the non-rural MPs who are Labour MPs, to say, actually, this is really important and will affect your constituents whether they are farmers or not, so you should think about this. How do we go around achieving that?
Well, first of all, thank you for reaching out to those Labour MPs, and I'm very conscious that there are some Labour MPs that are thinking very carefully about this and putting their constituents first, and I'm incredibly grateful to them for doing that. And we will, I will work with anyone to make this change. So we would do a bit of careful thinking about amendments, as I say, but the message, if I may, to your members is to please keep up the pressure through correspondence, through meetings, through phone calls with Labour MPs, because the parliamentary maths is very straightforward. Labour have an enormous majority, which even if all the opposition parties combine together and vote together, and in fairness, with one or two exceptions, we all are doing so, we still can't hope to beat the parliamentary maths. So we do need Labour MPs to join us in the division lobby on these important votes. And I wouldn't, please let's not write off the figure of 35 or whatever. That's still an enormous number of Labour MPs. I hope that they will be able to encourage others to join them. And as we've seen from the other U-turns that this government has made, when a group, a sizable group of MPs, Labour MPs, say that they are unhappy about a policy, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have U-turned. So I would encourage anyone who is thinking along those lines to do what they can quietly behind the scenes to make it clear how unhappy they are about this, and sharing your stories. I know it's difficult, and I totally understand that it feels very alien for a lot of people to share their circumstances. But if you feel able to share your circumstances with either Labour MPs or with me, and we can anonymise things, we can make it so that you are comfortable with it. But sharing those stories is what brings this to life.
I mean, we've got one member who quite simply is, and we discussed this last time we saw you, he's spending £40,000 a year on life insurance to protect the family farm in the event of his father's death within a 7-year period. So £40,000 a year, times 7, £280,000 that's being taken out of rural investment. Now that money ends up in the city, which then creates the mansion problem in Leicestershire. It's all wrong.
And also, of course, the costs of people taking advice. I mean, I had someone yesterday on the protest telling me they had spent £30,000 this year on financial and legal advice because of the family farm tax. And as you say, that's £30,000 out of taxable income, presumably, or certainly the business, that could have been spent on something far more productive. Apologies to the financial advisors out there, but this is not a usual business expense that people have prepared for or planned for in the past.
I wrote an article in Farmers Weekly last year, just after the budget, where I said the land agents and the accountants will take more money out of this than the Treasury ever does. And I hope I'm wrong, but I feel I may be right in that.
It's a trickle-down economics as well that I think it gets... people look at it as the effect on farming, but they, as you say, they forget about the effect of what happens when they don't go and build the shed, and then what does the guy who they paid to build the shed, what does he go and spend the money on? A new forklift or the extra staff? Or it's all that trickle down. And you think about it, if you take all of that away, the economic value is probably far greater by not having that tax than it is having it in place.
Yeah, and we forget our industry is very good at, and I'm going to use the word, digging people out of a hole. So when it snows, we clear the roads. When the wind blows trees down, we clear the roads. When people get stuck in lorries in flooded water, we pull them out. And that's all missed the value, the extra value that our industry gives to rural communities.
And the feeling of community. I mean, I feel that very strongly. I'm pointing at my big constituency map. My constituency is... I think 1,300 and something kilometres, square kilometres, I think, is the latest statistic I've got from the House of Commons Library. It's a vast part of the great county of Lincolnshire, but our communities, be they hamlets, be they villages, be they market towns, are so centred around farming and families looking after each other, particularly when times are tough, whether it's during the pandemic or, with very bad weather. It's that sense of community that I don't think they've priced in. And again, this is yet again, just one of the many reasons why instinctively we knew as Conservatives, this was, when it was announced last year, it's a bad tax, and we came out immediately against it. And we have made the solemn promise to farmers that we will axe the family farm and the family business tax, because, of course, it's not just farming that's affected by this, because we understand how much it is taking.
And it's a point that's missed from other industries, because this has been, the noise has came perhaps from the agricultural sector, but the business property relief affects everyone.
Of course.
And I think there's a bigger picture there that, in terms of getting a coalition of the willing to try and push back against that.
And family businesses have tried. There's a certain, if you like, we are very good. Somebody said we have great props, being a little bit sort of light-hearted about it. The great photos of the tractors and cattle and so on. But for family businesses, our market town high streets, we will begin to see the impact of this very, very quickly, because those family businesses that have been stalwarts on our market town high streets will be really suffering through this, and it's going to disproportionately affect rural areas. It will particularly disproportionately affect communities in the north and Midlands of the country, because we have a higher preponderance of family businesses in the north and in the Midlands, and this is the impacts of this are going to be felt long after the next general election, sadly. Yeah.
Now we are going to move on, and we appreciate your support on the inheritance tax issues and everything you're doing, but it would be remiss of us as an organisation to give you an easy run completely. So, you know, we weren't always pleased with what you did when you were in power. And one of my gripes was Michael Gove, a fellow Aberdonian, very clever politician in my eyes, but I think he coined the phrase public money for public good. And I think that's led us into a difficult path when the consumer and the general public think that farmers get money for nothing. What was the difference from EU money coming back? Was that not public money for public good, but it just went across the sea and came back first? Is the public money for public good a misconception that's led us into a difficult place?
Well, first and foremost, we're under new leadership under Kemi, who showed us all her firepower yesterday in the budget. But one of the first things I have announced, in addition to axing the family farm and family business tax, is that in all of our policy in future, the primary purpose of farming to grow and produce food will be the primary purpose in our legislation, our schemes and our policies going forward. So, you know, I've heard loud and clear from farmers, not just here, but, you know, through the association who's done a fantastic job of making this point to me, but also from my own farmers in my patch, that farming is about growing food, as well as, of course, ensuring that hedgerows, soil health, pollinator health, etc., are thriving as well. But your primary purpose is to grow food, so I give you that assurance. I would also say, though, I am really interested. I do think that we, you know, people that like coming to visit the countryside need to understand that when a hedgerow is looked after, when there are, you know, trees growing and thriving in a rural setting, that doesn't happen by chance. That is because of the careful nurturing of the people that...
I mean, our countryside is beautiful because of our industry, not in spite of it.
Yes. And so I think what Michael was... what we were trying to achieve through SFI was to actually give you the, you know, to remunerate you for the work that you would do anyway, if you see me for that.
Yeah.
And I think that if we can do... if we can help sell that positively to the public, I hope that they will then appreciate that, as you said, you know, ensuring that, for example, we are continuing to plant trees, but we do so in a way that is appropriate to the local, very local landscape, and we're planting, you know, types of tree, breeds of tree, if you like, that fit that landscape and native trees. That will be a very positive thing for generations.
And I think Michael knew that the value, and he emphasised that we need to look after our soils, to look after our harvests, to be able to feed ourselves. And perhaps his successors or civil servants have maybe just lost some of the direction needed to ensure that's the key.
I promise you, under the next Conservative government, growing food will be our priority in all of our farming and agricultural policy.
Having mentioned the SFIs, I think we need to try and touch on this if we can. So in a disastrous few weeks for the government last year, when BPS was suddenly snatched away, so people ran to the SFIs, SFIs were suddenly snatched away, and we were told at that point they'll be back maybe in the summertime, and then the summertime was maybe in the wintertime, and now the wintertime is like maybe next summertime. And all the time, so we were involved in a lot of consultations in a lot of different sort of aspects of the industry. I'm not hearing any consultations on the SFIs. This is being done in a dark room by dark people. Are you hearing anything about when they're going to restart or what they might look like?
It's been nothing but delay. And this was why this was one of the 5 asks that I've made of Emma Reynolds in our coming out of our Food and Farming Emergency Summit. You know, they have to launch this scheme urgently, and they also have to, there are some very technical points to the scheme, including, for example, mid-tier stewardships falling through, coming to an end next year. Yeah, all of these have to be sorted out very, very quickly. And one of the most frustrating things I find as a former minister is that one of my officials once described me as an impatient minister. In other words, I'm, you know, keen to get stuff done because we all know, you know, none of us know in politics how long you're going to be in role. So you've got to, you know, seize the moment and really run with it. I sense none of that urgency from ministers, none whatsoever. They're sitting around, you know, they eventually rolled out the continuation of, I think, the highest stewardship scheme. They eventually announced that. We've got, you know, for our fruit and veg growers out there who are very, very worried that their scheme is falling down on the 31st of December. They need to know now whether that's going to be rolled over or just stopped. And the SFI catastrophe, I mean, the way that was handled was an absolute debacle. And by the way, when they cancelled it on a Tuesday evening, 5 o'clock at Tuesday evening, there was no ministerial statement the next day to explain it. My team and I hauled the minister into in front of the dispatch box to explain what on earth was going on. Otherwise, we would have had no idea. Because they haven't explained it.
It's almost as if they don't care. So malice or incompetence? What do we think on this?
I think a combination of the both, I'm sorry to say. I think an awful lot of the current administration just don't know how to run a department and how to settle policy.
And change doesn't help. Obviously, the election last year, both DEFRA ministers changed. Now, at the recent reshuffle, both DEFRA ministers changed again, there's more than two, but the key ministers, DEFRA Secretary and the Farming Minister for us, so they've changed again. So I feel for the civil servants that do know what they're doing and are trying to drive for change. They've got to sell the argument again to new people. And we are honestly finding the new ministers more disengaged from industry than what the previous government was. And I don't know why. And I think they suffer from the inheritance tax shock because they were rolled out to defend a policy that wasn't theirs, and they got absolutely battered from here to God knows where because of that, and I think they made them a bit nervous.
So sympathy to Dan Zeichner, who was a former minister, who was rolled out in exactly that position, and we'd met with Dan beforehand, and we found him sympathetic to farmers' causes, and I don't think he was enjoying being put in a position where he was being asked to defend what was actually giving farmers a kicking.
And what thanks did he get for that? He got the sack.
He got the sack, yeah. So hats off
but
to people who try and care.
City Steve got a promotion to a bigger department.
He's got friends in high places, or low places, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah. So housing targets will be a challenge. Let's see how that goes. So, yeah.
Well, and that's the other worry coming along. Sorry, I just seem to be relaying doom wherever I go at the moment. But sadly, this is the state of this government's policies at the moment. The other thing that is rising quickly on people's radars is this the powers in the Planning and Infrastructure Bill on compulsory purchase orders. Part 3 of the bill will enable local authorities and Natural England to seize agricultural land, but also actually other land, so people's gardens. There's no definition in the bill to stop this. They'll be able to seize land for below market value to either build infrastructure on houses, but also Ed Miliband's solar panels and so on, as well as Natural England being able to offset that through the land they seize. So at the moment, there's no right of appeal against this. It is going to be an absolute nightmare for anyone who owns land because, as I say, these arms of government can come now and seize it from you. So when that starts to happen again, I think this will be an enormous shock to anyone who has worked hard on their family's land or bought land because they've made a success of their life, and then suddenly
it's another one to add to the list, isn't it?
The government comes and takes it.
It's a shocking thing. That's not socialism. There's another word for that, and it's
communism.
It's communism.
Yeah, communism.
Seizing people's land and not paying them for it. That's next level stuff. That is.
Yep.
So, I think the clock has ticked to the end of our allocated time. So, in true NBA fashion, we thought security would be quite challenging with a lump of roast beef. So we took a box of shortbread instead. So that's an appreciation of being our major guest on podcast number 2. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your input.
That was great.
And good luck with everything you do for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah.
Before we get into our final segment, Off the Hoof, we'd just like to say that we think it's really important that if inheritance tax is going to really adversely affect your business, that you just take the right advice. Talk to your accountants, talk to your solicitors, talk to your advisors, and find out what's best for your business. And if you feel that this is getting on top of you mentally, physically, or psychologically, please don't hesitate to call or speak to someone from one of our incredible farming charities. They are here to help. And to finish this podcast, we've got Off the Hoof with Abi Reader.
Wales is supposed to be the green grass at home. We are supposed to be the fountain of all rain shadows. And everybody thinks that the weather is going to be just like Disneyland. You're going to have cows and lambs skipping around in the field. But no, you either get flooding or you get absolute drought. Now, this year has been the year of the drought for me. It has been like grazing a golf course. And I know that because my neighbours are a golf course. Chucking those cows out in that field and watching them sulking at the gate and trying to stare you out so they can come back in the shed to eat is soul destroying. Then you bring them back in the shed, they eat all of that food, they start pumping the milk out, and next thing you know, there's a massive oversupply in the milk chain, and the milk price drops. Everybody's suddenly having a huge panic. We're all selling cows. We're having all sorts of issues. You go back a couple of years, flooding. Every time I do a piece for NFU Cymru on the weather, I am either whinging about the flooding or I am whinging about the drought. And there doesn't seem to be any happy medium at the minute. The last 7 out of 8 years, we have been in a drought on this farm. I live in Wales. I was speaking to someone earlier today and they told me that, yeah, there's a line that goes down the country and you were obviously on that line. And I was thinking, no, there is no line. I am a dot. Okay, because all of my neighbours have had rain, and it's like the rain comes towards me, and then it splits, it goes around the other side and shoves off. And I'm sure it's got something to do with the fact that I live near to Cardiff, and funnily enough, I live near to the Welsh Parliament, the Welsh Assembly, and I'm just thinking that the weather thinks, you know what, I can't be bothered with those guys, so I'm just going to skirt around, and I'm just caught in that tiny little rain shadow. I've had an absolute gutsful of farming with the weather. It causes so many issues. It pushes my costs up. It makes me grumpy. It makes the cows grumpy, which makes me even more grumpy. And, you know, sometimes I wake up in the morning and think, oh, bugger it, I just, you know, really want to go and do something else. I could be out in Barbados, owning a beach somewhere if I sold all my cows, but no, I'm stuck in a milking parlour, milking cows who are sulking, milking like there's no tomorrow, pushing my milk price down and causing me absolute havoc. So yeah, the weather, absolute ball ache.